Concept maquettes like these are statues used in the production of a film to get an idea of what a particular creature or character will look like in 3 dimensions. Sometimes they're used to refine and develop an existing concept, but in many cases during the production of Return of the Jedi, artists use them to create something completely from scratch. These statues would then be presented to George Lucas, who would select the ones he liked, and they would go on to be used to develop the full-sized creatures or costumes. This makes these statues the very first appearance of many of the characters that Star Wars fans grew to love, and I think that makes them particularly interesting and important. And apparently the folks over at Regal Robot agree with me because recently they've been scanning the original maquettes that are in the Lucasfilm archives and making replicas of them available to collectors as part of their archive collection. I've reviewed several statues from the archive collection in the past, including Jabba the Hutt, Max Rebo, and most recently Reese, but today we're going to be talking about Weequay. Weequay was sculpted by Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor Ken Ralston, who mostly worked on visual effects for Return of the Jedi, but was also given the chance to sculpt a number of concept maquettes for the film. In a recent interview with Regal Robot founder Tom Spina, Mr. Ralston mentioned that he was inspired by the character of Queequeg from the 1956 movie Moby Dick. In that movie, the character was shown with a lot of facial tattoos, a shaved head, and a ponytail, and while most of those details are different from what we see in the maquette, you can still see the influence of the Queequeg character fairly clearly. In fact, they referred to this character as Queequeg throughout the production of Return of the Jedi, only changing it later on to Weequay. This was then used to design the actual costumes for the Weequay guards used on the skiff in Return of the Jedi. It wasn't entirely clear to me at the time whether Weequay was meant to refer to an individual or a race of aliens, but they later made it clear that this was referring to all aliens of this particular race. And indeed, Weequays have appeared many times in other media since then. One thing that struck me when I first looked at this maquette was how relatively large it is. In fact, we can compare it here to the vintage Kenner Weequay figure. You can get some idea. These were not made to any particular scale, so the archive collection statues are kind of variable in that sense. When I got this in hand, I was also kind of reminded of a shrunken head, to be honest with you. Maybe it's the size of the maquette itself, the wrinkles and things around the eyes and mouth, and especially the false hair that they've put here really does remind me of a shrunken head. There's no indication that Mr. Ralston had that in mind when he was sculpting it, but it's possible it was there somewhere in the back of his mind. There are some elements of this maquette that didn't make it to the final design, such as this wound here that seems to go through the back of his neck on both sides and is bleeding, I guess. I'm not entirely sure what the story is here. And he also has some large elf-like ears that have sort of double tips on them. They also use a real chain necklace here around his neck, which is interesting. There are actually 2 editions of this statue. The one I have here is the signature edition, which has a plaque with Ken Ralston's signature on it. There's also a numbered edition, which comes with a numbered plaque, but without the signature on it. At the moment, there are a handful of the signature edition of these left on the Regal Robot website, like literally 6 or 7, but there are a number of the numbered edition still available if you are interested. It's also a little bit cheaper. Like all of the archive collection statues I have, this also came with a sort of certificate of authenticity that has a little bit of information about the piece itself and about the archive collection, as well as the signature of Regal Robot founder Tom Spina. As I say, this signature edition is limited to 100 pieces, which is not very much at all. The numbered edition is limited to 150 pieces. Here it is next to the reused statue, by the way. As I mentioned, these are not really done to any particular scale, so these don't really necessarily match up in terms of how big they would be in real life relative to each other, but this will give you some idea of their relative sizes. So that is the Weequay concept maquette replica from Regal Robot. I'm really looking forward to seeing what else they're going to be adding to the archive collection in the future, and a little bit scared because some of those concept maquettes were quite large, and I'm sure they're going to be expensive and difficult to replicate, but I'm sure they'll be able to pull it off. There's a link to the product page for this statue in the video description, as well as a link to the interview that Regal Robot did with the designer Ken Ralston. I encourage you to check those out if you're interested. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again soon. As always, my thanks go out to my supporters on Patreon, including these Palace VIPs, Angelica Brady and Jesper Murtu. If you'd like to know how you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month, you can click the link in the video description.